There are going to be dozens of us. We will be nice. Uh-huh. Okay.
And we can get started, but this is going to be a rather dull meeting. Although I'm pleased that Tero and Pete are here.
Agree. Rather dull meeting. At least we may have total agreement among both of the participants. Among the participants.
We scared Pete again.
Mm. Well, Pete sometimes appears in...
Can you hear me now at least?
Oh, yes.
Ah,
Yes.
but don't tell me you could hear me all the time, because I was...
No.
Okay, cool. So for some reason it didn't like my headset today. Is the quality somehow okay because it's over the...
Works.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, seems fine. Okay, shall we get started?
Yep.
Well, at least we can go through the boilerplate. Okay, so hello everybody. I would be shocked if you never seen Note well, any of you people, unless somebody's trying to impersonate you. Aren't your driving slides? Can you give me control or?
Am I? Well, I know how to hit the right arrow, but I don't know how to give you control.
That's fine. Note well. This is an IETF activity under Note well. Keep going.
Note well continued. We all know that, even I.
Okay.
Treat colleagues with respect. Speak slowly and limit the use of slang. Do not use RFC 1925 as a verb. This session is being recorded. Both. Please say the
It's
thing,
okay.
Alexei.
For this exciting session, we need an outtaker.
That means you, Teru.
Pretty much.
Permit me to type as required.
Alright, we can try to cover the main points, but
actually, I have Emacs open. Permit me to add notes here, somewhat to the right of my talking computer.
okay, so I think we can cover most of the points. Right, next. Next slide, please.
Oh, how do I release?
Yeah, so we'll be talking mostly about issues with the base spec, which was recently updated to 0.3. And now just release slides so somebody else, so that Hans-Jörg can project.
Like that.
Should I use my own slides, or are they uploaded?
They uploaded. Use the slides.
Okay. So you showed them. Do I need to do something, or should I write them? You need to tell me. Alexei?
You're not sharing anything, are you?
Should I? Because I saw there was slide shared. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
Fine.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Should I start?
Yep.
Mr. Chair. All right. Okay. Yeah. So welcome everybody. This late in the evening, early in the morning, depending on where you are. As Alexei said, we talk about the core spec here. And basically, we go through a number of issues which are listed here in the issue list. There will also be a small list in the end in case we will be earlier. But I would start with the vocabularies point 3.2. This is actually something we haven't discussed last time because so far this vocabulary section was basically reading in the spec that it's recommended to use the schema.org vocabulary if it is covering one's use case, but otherwise any other valid JSON LD might be or would be okay as well. One thing that came up in discussions is the question if an IANA registry might be interesting for vocabularies in general. So there is, for instance, a vocabulary proposed in the out of office or vacation notice draft, yeah, which will also exist. And the question is a little bit in order for clients to know which vocabularies exist besides schema.org. If it would in general be useful for the draft to define an IANA registry where vocabularies could be looked up for documentation purposes. That's basically one question here. Before probably we discuss it, the second thing is for the so these vocabularies registered in the registry, that might be vocabularies also by third parties that want to register it, just like typical IANA registries work. But as I said, we have also this particular vocabulary which might be defined in RFC, like structured vacation notice. So the question is a little bit, typically for a vocabulary, you also have a website describing the vocabulary as such. So if you go to schema.org, there is a website where the concepts and the usage of the vocabulary is defined. So it's a little bit like a code document or API documentation document, you could say, for those more familiar with that. And so besides a registry, another question might be for this particularly internal or vocabulary defined in RFCs, is it actually possible to host something like an API spec or so on the IENA website or as part of IENA? Is anybody aware of that or has an opinion here?
Yes. For media type registries, IENA creates a separate web page with a registration template.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a separate registry page with links to such pages.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you want?
Yeah, so that's basically, if I remember correctly, that's basically TXT files, right? These templates.
Yep.
But if I understand you correctly, it's not restricted to that, but it could also be HTML files.
I think we need to ask, but yeah.
Well,
what is I can? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but you technically, well, you can work for ICANN and know nothing about IENA. Well, I mean, unlikely.
Absolutely. But if I... yes, we texts do speak to each other.
Mm-hmm.
IENA isn't terribly happy about allowing anything more than basically tables of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
They want to register something that is in some way a row in a table. If we can make it be a row in a table, fine.
Mm-hmm.
If not, there will be a little bit of wind in our faces.
Okay. Okay, but in any case, we have Ben there, I think, joining. I mean, in any case, I guess it is something that could be discussed at an IETF meeting with the IENA desk people there, or what would be the best procedure for the second part of the question. Yeah. Okay. So as for the first, okay. So.
Yes, there are actually, depending what you meant by this, there might be more issues in this area depending on what you want, because I think we need to figure out what our relationship with schema.org.
Yeah.
As in, do we want to encourage all IETF RFCs who register new, is object class the right term? Something like, new.
Yeah, type, you can say type.
Yeah, if the document can encourage everybody to register with schema.org, irrespective of whether we're also doing something with IENA, just because it's the most common repository for this. But I also don't know if there are any implications of this. I mean, how politically correct it would be to reference to non-IETF stuff in this. So yeah.
I think there is basically three issues here. So one is certainly there will be other vocabularies at some point which are not schema.org. So this is why I think in generally this overall registry might make sense. The second point is indeed the question you ask is, for these like things like structured vacation notice, would you put them to schema.org or would you put them to this others? Would there be a place in IENA for this particular type as well?
Or even both.
or even both. Because one question I think is also governance. So I think it would not be guaranteed to have something within schema.org because it's a separate community which takes their own decisions and has their own timeline. So it might be a little bit, cumbersome if you publish an RFC with a consensus type, which is then not, which of course you could arrange that in parallel, but I'm not sure how well that would work probably. But that's certain. That's sorry.
Sorry, are you finished?
Yeah. I was not sure what you were saying. So if you were.
No, Ben is in the queue. So Ben.
Hi guys. Hey. So I think it's good to recommend schema.org as a hint that this is a good vocabulary to look to. However, if we want interoperability, we need to specify specific use cases and specific vocabularies and what they mean. So there's multiple ways that could be done. One is that we say if we make an RFC for the specific use cases, like we have an RFC for IMIP for calendar invitations, we use the same scheme to define the specific use cases and how they work and the meaning of that as part of an EIFC. Second option would be that the IETF creates something like schema.org and then defines things in the same way so that it moves maybe a little bit faster than RFCs. A third way would be to just delegate that to schema.org or to use IANA. And I think my preference would be to do something like schema.org and then have like approved vocabulary that the IETF approves and says like, if you want to do this, then you would do it in that way. And there's a website which defines that so that it can iterate a little bit more faster than RFCs. But it is necessary to define specifically how to do specific use case. Otherwise, everybody does whatever they want.
Michael.
Hi, sorry, I'm late and I may be to this conversation, but Karsten's been through the schema.org versus not versus IANA versus IETF already in the ASDF document. So if you want to look at the ASDF working group's SDF document, you'll see that there's an Appendix B, which is the JSON schema.org rendition of SDF syntax. And he's basically got a kind of minimal way of doing some things without having to import all of that syntax or necessarily standardize elsewhere. So it might work for you. I'm not quite sure I understand I missed the question. Sorry.
Which RFC?
It's not yet an RFC. It's in the RFC editor queue. So look for draft IETF, ASDF, SDF. I can put it in chat somewhere here. Click.
Well, that definitely sounds helpful to look at. I think.
There you go.
Awesome, thanks.
And well, he's pretty clueful about all of that, so he may also be able to help.
Great. I think for this very moment, I think if there's no particular opinion on the first part of having a registry in general, yes or no, I think we can proceed to the other topics for now. Okay. With that input to be processed. Looking at Alexei, all fine? Yeah.
Yes. Nobody is taking notes, so I'm just trying to backfill. So yes, please proceed.
I understood Art is taking some, but I was not. I'm not 100% sure. Okay. All right. So we get to the. Okay. We get to the point of how to embed the JSON LD in in emails, and there was quite discussions at the last 2 meetings about that, and so it seems like this idea of having it clearly separated in a clean way, like you would expect that in multi-part alternative, like having historically the text plain part, a text HTML part, and then a kind of a machine readable part seems to be something a lot of clients seem to like to have for easier parsing and so on. And there is actually just a few issues that were open. One is compatibility testing. So like, how will existing clients deal with that? Will there be any issues? We will come to that in a minute. We did some initial tests on that. That was something that was discussed a lot in Dublin, like that we need to test this a little bit. And one thing that actually came up to my mind, and I also wrote that in the list, and I think Arndt was the only one responding to that, is a little bit, I could actually not find any guidance if it theoretically is allowed in an email to have multiple multi-part alternative elements, because we might want to think about what it would mean here in this case. So the way I understood it,
there is no restriction. You can have anything, any number of anything at any level in the most generic case.
Okay, so but the question is, so the interesting question is then, how do we need, so this certainly we need to deal with somehow here, right? What that would mean, right? I mean, first of all, let's say in the status quo, non-SML, what will happen in clients? So will they be able to deal with that, or is that more like an arcane special case?
I think clients should be able to deal with this, because clients like Thunderbird has to render arbitrary stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So I can tell you that my web client is also rendering arbitrary multi-part alternatives. It always picks one that it supports what it renders.
Okay.
I looked a little bit more on the multi-part messages in my mail database, several thousand. It seems that there's no breakage involved. Several of the messages were from Apple Mail going to a wide list of recipients, and I didn't see any complaints about breakage in those threads. So if Apple Mail does it and I didn't notice any complaints, then I'm not afraid. There may be some, but I'm not afraid.
Which particular thing are you referring to here? And I'm not following fully what you mean.
I looked for email messages that contained multi-part alternative within, I don't remember exactly, multi-part alternative within multi-part alternative, as I recall.
Okay.
And found messages sent by Apple Mail and another major client.
Okay.
Much less than 0.1% of my mail, but I did see a considerable number of messages in the past 30 years.
Okay. So I guess that was first of all the question, if I misunderstood something in RFCs, or if this is really possible. So if it is really possible, we probably, it's I guess not a big deal, but we must then expect that people might also have multiple machine readable parts within the mail, and we at least need to add some sentence like how are clients supposed to deal with that, right? Or that they need to treat all of them in the context of the particular multi-part entity, right? So just to give an example, just to give an example, I mean, we have that example like you have. Let's just assume we have just a single multi-part alternative, regular email, right? So if you would have a client that is able to show the machine readable part, it could just render this particular part for the user, right? So now assume you would have two multi-part alternatives, like let's say in a multi-part mixed on the same level. I understand that current clients might probably render those underneath right now, so 2 times HTML underneath, or 2 times plain text, if I get all of you right? So in the machine readable part, then the client would need to decide how to deal with 2 machine readable representations, first of all. But there might also be the case that the client, if we want to not to disallow that, that the client maybe in one multipart alternative will be having the machine readable part, but in the other part not. So then, in the sense, you would probably not have full representation of the whole message, but you would still render a user readable part, which might be fine. But we should probably just make sure that people understand that when implementing, or think through the consequences of that.
Yeah, I think I will need an example, but yes. Ben?
Yeah, so my mind went in the same direction as Arndt. So the specification allows everything. Like there is no restriction whatsoever which parts can appear where, including multi-part mix, multi-part alternative. You can mix whatever you want. In reality, that's different because the specification doesn't even say what the body of an email is. And we all have a common sense understanding what the body of an email is, but the specifications don't say that. And the clients just encode that as common sense. So I would not go into freaky, unusual stuff like making an attachment and then making the attachment a multi-part alternative, because I don't know how a client would render that if an attachment is a multi-part alternative. It's written to deal with that as a body. And for Thunderbird, I can say because I looked at the specific code and I even wrote on that code. So I'm fairly certain that Thunderbird for the body part would deal with multi-part alternative that it doesn't understand. It would just ignore that and take the next latest. But for an attachment, I wouldn't know. So what I would recommend is the last IETF meeting, we talked about some services which can take an arbitrary email and render that in multiple clients. I would recommend before you exercise that to use one of the services and check how the clients render that.
Okay, but irrespective of that, I mean, I understand. Once we define there is multi-part alternative, which allows a machine readable part, there at least also needs to be some explanation what that means in the case you have multiple multi-part alternatives, right? I think
what I'm trying to say is don't explain that unless you have checked that the clients can actually deal with that.
But I understood
It's also, when you say multi-part alternative, that can mean bazillion of things. So like there are cases where you can have multi-part alternative directly within multi-part alternative. It's silly because you might as well have a single multi-part alternative with all the choices, but it's still legal. And it even might do something sensible. Then there are cases like Ben was saying about if you declare the whole multi-part alternative as an attachment, I'm not sure whether a lot of MUAs will handle this correctly. I mean, it's kind of a separate case from what we're discussing, but there are some potentially very odd and interesting cases where we don't necessarily have to concern ourselves with. If you have some specific cases you want to emphasize that they're still legal, maybe we can have examples.
But I think my main point here is why I brought this up. It seems to be something at least we need to discuss about, and nobody brought this up to date, right? I'm not fully convinced with what Ben said that testing this in clients will completely help us over this. I think what would also help is if somebody could provide actually some real-world examples where this happens. So when you say there is a multi-part alternative in a multi-part alternative, who is doing that? I mean, is that in answers?
I'm not saying
Yeah.
I'm not saying anybody is doing it, but it's legal, and
Sure,
I have created test cases for this myself manually.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think Arndt.
The most common case is multi-part, well, either multi-part alternative. It's typically multi-part mix and then multi-part alternative with alternative choices for the main displayable part.
Just Arndt in the queue.
Ben?
Arndt is in the queue.
Sorry, Arndt?
Yep. While I love exploiting the full flexibility of the standards, particularly around the beginning of April, I think that we don't want to go there in this document. The what's it called? That restricted HTML thing that Google did accelerated something pages, AMP. They suggested sending AMP as the second to last body part before the HTML, even though it was to be preferred, unless we have concrete knowledge that that is bad. Then I suggest mentioning that as the only configuration. Basically, leave this set of dogs sleeping, and then going on to more.
May I directly respond to that?
Pedantry.
Short response to that, Arndt. I'm not sure if that will solve our problem here. So this middle part thing, I think, was already discussed in Dublin, was a prior issue with Apple Mail, some people suggested, which is in the meantime fixed, and it seems like that. So we probably don't need to obey this guidance anymore. So it can be the last part in the multi-part alternative list as it is suggested by the spec. That's one thing. If we can take that guidance, like if we can simplify it here as it is done in AMP, that's a question. I mean, the problem is what the AMP people say is basically, if you want to send an AMP email, this email will always be just a multi-part alternative with multi-part TXT, HTML, AMP, and then HTML, right? So we could say that an SML mail always is as simple as that as well, yeah? And then we would get away with all these issues here. Yeah? But the question is if we want to restrict to that. Yeah?
And what I try to say is that we should just describe that and say nothing more about any other configuration than if you want something else, you're on your own, no guidance, because we don't want to spend more time on this particular issue.
Yes, I strongly agree with that, because we should specify what we want to do, and that needs to work. And then we leaving the rest open leaves the path open to do it differently. But then, like for example, I would go from the other direction. Like, what do we want to do? How would we express that in MIME? And then see, do the clients work with that or break? And I think the use cases that we need are fairly simple to express in MIME. And we just need to check those, and the rest is then you're on your own. If you make it arbitrarily complex, that also means that the implementations of the clients become arbitrarily complex, because somebody needs to actually implement that it works, right? So if you make it very complicated, the clients need to do complicated work for every message to actually find that, right? So to be very specific, I think most clients will deal with multi-part alternative as part of the body. That will probably, hopefully work. And that the SML is the last multi-part alternative, the most preferred one. My gut feeling tells me that many clients will break if you put a multi-part alternative inside a multi-part mixed as an attachment. Without having checked that, I would guess that many clients would have a problem with that.
I mean, I'm a little bit concerned with your notion of as an attachment, because everything is a body part, right? I mean, there is nothing like an attachment in the literal sense.
But that is exactly my point. That is exactly my point. In MIME, there is no such concept, but in clients, there is. We have a real-world notion that an email has a body and has attachments. In MIME, these concepts don't exist. And it's just clients that build the UI in this way because this is how we use email. And there is this disconnect between what the specifications say and what the real world does. And if you're exploiting that discrepancy between the specification and the real world, you're coming into territory which will probably not work. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Do I get to speak?
Yes.
MIME does have attachments. It's in the content disposition RFC. I forget the RFC number, but content disposition is it.
Yeah, I was about to say the same. So I think Ben is correct. There is interaction between how content disposition works with various multi-part structures. So there might be some interop issues, but general case of I think multi-part mixed containing the first part typically being multi-part alternative and then a bunch of attachments in other body parts. That's a very common configuration that will have to work. Or just having multi-part alternative at the top level because you have no attachments. That's also a common case, yes. So I'm pretty sure these two configurations work. Some more specific stuff, I tend to agree with Arndt and Ben that we probably shouldn't go and describing them unless we either want to encourage or discourage certain use cases. Hans-Jörg, you put yourself in the queue.
Yes, I was not sure if you were already finished or just breathing.
I'm done.
Yeah, I put myself in the queue to exert some pressure here. I mean, for the content disposition attachment, yeah, of course it exists. But I would say if somebody explicitly puts a multi-part alternative into a multi-part mixed with the content disposition of attachment, that would probably be a case where you would say, if anyway most clients treat that as an attachment, that is probably not part of the direct user interaction to render. Yeah? So that would probably be something the client should only interpret the SML if the user explicitly. I'm not sure if there's actually any guidance in the content disposition RFC on how to provide the interaction with those attached things, but that is probably something I would rather exclude as a case here, right? On the other hand, what people said before, like Ben and partially Arndt, is at least I'm not 100% sure if the strategy of we just don't tell people about it and hope they don't use it, if that will not cause also confusion in the end. So I'm also not sure we will find a final solution here today. So I mean, one of the reasons was probably also to first of all understand if we have an issue here. I think practically also like 99% of the mails will probably rather have a very similar shape and format, but we might still consider some corner cases if they need to be, as Alexei said, encouraged or discouraged. And maybe it would be
my concern would be with if you prescribe a very rigid structure, then you prevent further extensibility potentially, which is already exists by default with MIME. So I think we have to be careful what we'll do here. But yes, this will need more discussion for sure.
I think as one takeaway message, and maybe a question to Arndt, who seems to have investigated particularly some real world messages he had, would be really to see and understand some cases where really some multi-part alternative happens in the real world, and to see what kind of cases are that. Are that services sending that for some reason? Are that clients answering existing emails and somehow wrapping the existing stuff into a new multi-part alternative, which I would be somehow surprised as well, but maybe that happens. I think that would help a little bit, also thinking about if we discourage or encourage it. Because clients might have then this kind of algorithm anyway, so we might need to guide them in telling them if they should apply whatever logics they have there also to the machine viewer part.
Okay, Arndt?
I will pick 10 messages at random and try to guess why the client composed the message in this way.
Awesome.
Arndt, can we actually collaborate maybe offline? If you can share these examples.
In that case, I have to pick enough examples that they are shareable, that I have 10 shareable.
Even if you have a,
Yep.
one, I'm still curious about that.
Yep.
So, all right.
Will do.
One very final point on the slide, and probably we don't need to discuss him at that time, but in the recent interim about trust, there was also partly on the mailing list, there was also a discussion about there might be cases where it might be useful to sign the structured data somehow, right? One of the ideas that might be used here is like the Josie set of signing JSON things, probably. So just to keep in mind, probably nothing we need to decide by now, but if that is a path at some point that maybe the trust RFC or so would be going, there might be also the case where not application LD plus JSON would be the MIME type of the multi-part alternative, but perhaps application like Josie plus JSON or something like that. Can anybody follow my point? Alexei is looking a little bit puzzled.
Just a different media type that has signature in it as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the concern is here, if we would just write application LD plus JSON in the draft, we would basically prohibit or lock out ourselves from providing a signed version at a later point, or And the question is that
of course, when you say signed, I'm thinking of SML multi-part signed, and that's a bit different. But yes, if you personally, I don't object to having more than one, as long as you can describe the differences.
Right. So just very shortly, because you mentioned SMIME, so I think the discussion was like, SMIME signatures are on the level of the message, the whole mail, whereas at some points you might not able to control it as a sender, the whole message. So for that cases, it might be interesting to have, the ability to sign at a content level or at the structured data level, not at the whole message level. It's just,
Well, sorry, just made me think of other things that you can do. So yeah, technically you can also do multi-part sign not at the top level. SMIME doesn't say what it means, but you can do that as well.
I'm not sure if that was it a correction or a contradiction or just a comment? Didn't get how it related.
I think what I'm trying to say is I'm challenging a little bit that it protects the whole. Typically, it will protect the whole message because multi-part sign is at the top level body part. The top level node that contain, has everything inside it.
Don't take me too literal in terms of signing the whole message, but we agree there might be cases where just the structured data might be signed for some reason, right? Or you don't disagree with that?
Sure.
Okay.
So what I initially started thinking about actually was if you have forward messages as attachments, for example, you can have a lot of potentially signed nodes which are not top level. So it's kind of counterpoint. I mean, I'm not sure a lot of clients can actually do sensible things with it. Rather, they are not going necessarily to going to show signatures on them. Something like a general use like Thunderbird might be able to, when you click on a specific forwarded message, show you signature for that part. Yeah. So
we have Arndt.
I'll shut up now, Arndt.
Thanks. I think we're spending time on discussing whether something might be useful in unknown future settings. Which really, do we need to do that? Can't we just specify something now and leave more complicated structures unspecified? Not banned, but unspecified?
Agreed.
I think if we know that certain things will evolve and be added, it's probably worth having some text warning implementers that certain things might come in the future. It partially affects extensibility, right? If people take your Hans-Jörg, as you said, if we say that you can only have multi-part alternative with 3 parts, and LDJSON is the last one, then it will prevent extensibility potentially if somebody takes it too literally. Unless we say, look, this is the current structure, but if we say the last part might be some other thing with signature in the future, obviously sometimes we wouldn't know, but if we already know this is probably the way it's going to go, I think it's worth saying a bit more about that.
So I somehow, there was actually the discussion about that, and people brought that up, I think, in discussions in Dublin. So I think it's not a total theoretical case, and we probably don't need to discuss it to the end right now. But I also wanted to know how we deal with that in general in that spec here. And I see there would be multiple ways of doing that, right?
Yes.
But I agree, it's probably not the most important topic.
Okay. If we don't have a ticket on this, we should create it.
Yeah, I would do. Okay. Good. Then I would go to the next slide. Okay. Or Arndt?
Yeah.
Do you want to say something? No.
What do I note down about ticket?
GitHub ticket, I think, was what Alexei said, right? A discussion ticket at GitHub. Did I get that correctly, Alexei? Alexei?
I couldn't hear you quite well.
So Arndt asked what he should note down. I think you meant a GitHub ticket, right?
Well, I propose to create new tickets. I think, he wants to minute whether we decided any new ticket should be created or not.
Yeah.
No? Is it
Go
what
on.
you meant?
Go on. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Then I would go to the next slide. Okay. If everybody's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I will go one slide first because there's actually a the good thing is we probably don't need to discuss a lot about this slide, because actually the same question comes here: does it break clients? And is it possible to have multi-part related? But obviously we discussed already, and the answer is probably yes. So that's actually the same case as in the multi-part alternative. And that brings us basically to the tests we have been done with multi-part alternative, but also with the multi-part related rendering. Good news is any of the clients or webmailers which are listed here don't go totally wild. So the green check mark means like it's so obviously none of these was SML enabled. They are all classic clients, but there was a JSON LD in different facets. You see that on the table heads involved, but it didn't break any of those clients. So all the clients did show the HTML part, most of them, I guess, as they were supposed to be. The only thing that was a little bit special, of course, is that some of the clients where you see the small paperclip, they were showing as an attachment. So the JSON LD part somehow made them show up that as an attachment underneath the email. The interesting thing is, as you can see, that behavior was a little bit inconsistent around certain clients for some reason. That's a little bit surprising. I also have to say that for the multi-part related, we actually missed to set it as content disposition inline, what we should have probably been doing. So it's not so surprising that the majority of clients will show that particular case as an attachment. We will still conduct that test with disposition inline and see if it makes a difference. But I think overall this is a good result, because it shows that if we would decide in this core spec to proceed as we currently have it in the spec, it should basically be okay-ish with existing legacy clients, if nobody disagrees here. But that's my reading of the thing here, right?
Ben?
So you're saying the result of that means it's okay, because if we have a multi-part alternative and the client shows it as an attachment, I would call that as a fail for the test, not as a pass. Because
just to give you some context, sorry for interrupting you. I think the question was posed in Dublin that we need to check if that severely breaks the user experience if we put in a JSON LD here, meaning that it totally breaks the display of it. Yeah? So I would say this attachment thing, yeah, I agree with you, it's not perfect, yeah, but it's at least not completely screwing up the email. Yeah?
So the issue that I brought up in Dublin was the issue that we had with vCards. vCards were also rendered exactly in a similar way. And that caused major problems because people receive these vCards as attachment. It shows up in the client as attachment, which is disturbing. And because people think that there is something actually attached to it, and then they try to open it, and then they ask the person, hey, I cannot open this. I don't have an application for this. What did you send me here? And that causes issues between the two participants because the recipient doesn't know what it is. And I think this is something important because it's an attachment. And he thinks he misses part of the email. So something machine readable showing up as an attachment, I would say it's a fail. We cannot do that.
Well, again, my reading of what we discussed in Dublin is that these were two different things, right? So the main question that was raised in getting this table done was basically, especially also because there was a suggestion which Arndt mentioned earlier, that in the AMP case, Google explicitly says put this JSON LD in the middle, disagreeing with the RFC spec, because it broke in the past Apple Mail severely, and that was not just showing an attachment here. Yeah? So the task of doing this comparison, as far as I got the task assigned, was basically to check if that is still necessary in some reason, or if the client will, as I say, break severely. Yeah? I agree with you. There was also the discussion about the vCard, which was another discussion. And I don't say it's not a problem. Yeah? It's also something, and this is why I also noted it here. Yeah? So probably the green check doesn't mean it's super perfect. It just means it doesn't fail with HTML and machine readable part, it still shows an attachment which still might be bad. Yeah? So maybe we can agree on that, first of all. But then, okay, the conclusion is, of course, are we totally done then here, or what can we do about this, or do people see this as a problem in proceeding with that? Which I understood somehow, Ben, you do. So the question is, what do other people probably say?
I would say, can we get Gmail to be fixed? And round loop, we can fix that. If we can get Gmail to be fixed, the rest will sort itself out.
Maybe also worthwhile trying content disposition inline on the multi-part alternative, even though I think that's not strictly defined, but maybe it has an effect. We will at least probably try it.
Absolutely. I also think that's, I mean, I get the point that Ben is saying that it might be unexpected for users, but I also don't see that allowing something to be seen as an attachment is a big failure mode. Because if you're a more advanced user, that may be something you want to know. Because the idea with this, you can save attachment and invoke an external application in it, which is a useful functionality potentially.
I mean, I would somehow, I mean, I still see the point Ben has, because he has a right point that there is a long history of people complaining about weird attachments like this windmail dot in Outlook or vCards, which they cannot deal with. So I certainly see this as a little bit a point here. But I also think if we look at this list, that there might be possibilities, once the spec is ready or while it is in its final stages, to work together with these vendors where it's currently messed up to clean it up. I think it's at least not impossible.
The big takeaway that I have from here is that Apple Mail and Outlook are fine, which is surprising for me, because these two clients have been a major problem in the past, especially in the MIME handling, taking it very loosely. So if these two are working, because Apple Mail has like more than 50% market share in the US for private users, and Outlook has like 90% market share for business users. So if these two are working, and we can get Gmail to move, then I think we're fine, basically. So that's a good news here, that these Apple Mail and Outlook are working. I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we are close.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, the question is, we are close to the end of the hour. So the question is, shall we start another?
Actually, no. You're right. We only have 3 minutes, so that's probably not enough.
I'd like to know what the next is, actually.
Okay. Here we go. It's about, I think, the referencing structured data collection. But I can also, I had some email with John Devine, who had a comment on that in the Dublin IETF, and I will probably bring that to the list from that.
We discussed some of it at Dublin.
That's correct, and there was some suggestion by John Devine, and I was in, I tried to reconcile what he intended and how that might work out. But I think we can do that on the list.
Okay. Can you stop sharing slides?
Sure.
For a moment, thank you. I mean, I don't have much to show, but I think there is just one slide at the end. So, from previous interim, chairs still have a action item to start adoption call on trust draft. I mean, the other 2 items are from, again, Philip suggested he will write separate draft and structured replies. but he said it will take him a couple of months potentially to do that. And he's not here. Yes, we have a meeting booked in Bangkok. I think it's tentatively on Friday at the moment. So, Hans-Jörg, do you know if you can update the draft before Bangkok? Is there useful input?
I think yes, I think so. It makes sense.
I mean, I think we'll probably have more questions now that we had before, but that's, I suppose, also useful input potentially. Yeah, in the meantime, please post messages to the mailing list asking on specific issues, and maybe we can have discussions.
I have a great one. It will really bring out the pedant in you.
Okay.
So we look forward. Yeah.
Any other business? We 1 minute over time now.
Let's go and have dinner, except for, I guess, Michael.
Yes. All right then. Thank you for coming. I think despite the low attendance, that was still useful. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.